Welcome back, everybody, to a Christmas episode of the Long Game Podcast. This will be the last episode of the year, and we're delighted to have made it a full year, and that so many of you
Yeah.
are still watching. And so we'd like to thank everybody for your continued attention and ears and eyeballs that you've deemed us worthy
Or whatever
to.
other body part you've devoted to the podcast.
Well, yeah, some of you have devoted other body parts to Jason in particular after the last episode. The amount of comments about his attractiveness, distinct absence of comments about my attractiveness, I will note. I seem to have been hung out to dry by the audience, but
That's
that's
why
fine.
I did request to be introduced as the resident sex symbol because, yeah, I mean, we got like 5 comments, people saying, gosh, the webcam's usually very unflattering to Jason. He looks much better in studio. So I had no idea what way to take that comment because it obviously implies that I look like trash every week, but that I look good in the studio. So thank you anyway for for my new status as Gript sex symbol.
Yeah, I think that's what they call a neg, when you try to take somebody down a peg while trying to get with them. So,
Well,
yeah,
I look horrendous this week again anyway, so my pride isn't gonna survive another week.
Yeah, I didn't want to tell you, but you are pretty hideous. I think that jumper is not doing any favors.
Business as usual.
Absolutely. Back to your regularly scheduled program. So with that said, we might kick it off with our first topic, which is whether or not Ireland has reached peak woke. This is something that we were arguing about this morning because I am of the view that we have reached the high watermark when it comes to woke madness, which is not to say that wokeness is no longer a problem. It's not to say that the government is not still engaging in all kinds of absurd nonsense that people like us would rather they didn't. But it is simply to say that this is kind of the year when it became embarrassing as a politician to come across like a blue-haired lunatic with a septum piercing, because we saw, just to take one example, Heather Humphreys on the campaign trail for the presidency giving the correct description of what a woman is, which, I think a year ago, a Fine Gael prominent politician saying that a woman is a biological female would have been unthinkable because they were totally bought into gender ideology. And then she said that, and it kind of went off with almost no controversy. I don't remember any headlines trashing her for that or attacking her. So that seemed to have just been sort of accepted by the political and media establishment as something that's not that controversial anymore. You'll notice the government's rhetorical pivot on immigration. Whether or not they've actually pivoted in practice is another question. Obviously, they're still projecting huge influxes of asylum seekers and immigrants over the next number of years. So, you could say that that's still a huge problem. There's still IPAS centers going up all over the country and these asylum hubs with the City West Center and so on. So there's loads to complain about, but they've gotten to the point now where they have to at least rhetorically acknowledge that mass migration is a problem. They can't just say, yeah, there's going to be loads of immigrants coming in and it's a great thing and diversity is our strength. They know that people won't tolerate that anymore and that there's no appetite for it. So they have to look very earnest when they're talking to the camera and say, oh, yes, it's a very serious issue. And you raise a good point, Ben. I do think that's something we need to look at and address and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, my point is at the end of it all that I think this is the year when they have started to become embarrassed about some of their more extreme policies. And so hopefully you would think that means embarrassment is the first step on the road to reversing some of them in the not too distant future. But I believe you might disagree with me on that, Jason. I'd like to hear your alternative and incorrect take.
No, I do. I'm going to rely on my looks to carry my side of the debate here, but I do disagree with you on this one, and I thought it was important to discuss as well because we started the podcast about a year ago, and in the early episodes we very much discussed. I used the phrase a number of times in the early podcasts, something along the lines of the winds of change are blowing, or the prevailing moral winds are heading in a different direction now, largely as a response to Trump's victory in the US and the plans his administration had for America. America obviously being so central to exporting culture and morality, and for better or for worse. And anyway, the bottom line was that in those early episodes, I think it very much took the position that change was coming and you were going to see a very rapid response to that in Ireland and across Europe as politicians figured that out and tried to remain in America's favor. I don't think in hindsight that has happened at all. My analysis at this stage is simply that the game has entered a dangerous new phase where I'm reluctant even to use the phrase woke, although obviously that's kind of what we're talking about here. I would nearly say, moral degradation in many ways has simply gone to ground and is battening down the hatches while a hostile American administration is in place in the US. I think there were a lot of examples you can point to of this. I would say I agree with you that politicians in Ireland got a lot more savvy with their messaging, although a lot of people still don't buy it on a bunch of different things. I think primarily on immigration, but in terms of substance, a lot of things haven't changed to the point that by the end of 2025, you can have a vote that looks at, oh, I should have pulled it up before this, the essentially the extreme abortion vote that took place just a couple of days ago, and it can just barely fail by what, 2 or 3 votes in the Dáil. That was an extraordinary, that was an extreme proposition that was being pushed through there, and it can just barely fail. I think that's utterly shocking. I think, despite the fact that we're talking primarily about Ireland's positioning here, I think you can't, again, for better or worse, extricate it from what's going on in America at the moment, America being as influential as it is. And I think a real mask off moment that did have ramifications across Europe was the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I think that was a defining moment of 2025 when he his killing was one thing, and that was bad and that was shocking. I really feel like the more, and I use this word in its original sense, apocalyptic moment in the sense of unveiling the reality or revealing what's already there, was the reaction, not just in America, but here in Ireland and in the UK, to his murder, where a bunch of people that you live alongside and that you, in your family, your friends group, were essentially justifying that he was shot in the neck in front of his family at an event. And a lot of people said, yeah, it's terrible. But I mean, he was kind of asking for it because of all of these, terrible opinions. And they take a load of things he said out of context. And I feel like that prevailing moral rot is very much that was an exposure of it to a previously unseen degree. And indeed, I think that element, I think what you've got going on at the moment is a kind of you've got an emergence of a vocal new right, which hasn't eaten into, now speaking very broadly here, it hasn't eaten into at all the left's audience or market. What it has done is radicalize that element and make them realize that there's sort of a growing threat on the right. And so they've become more militant and more vicious and more radicalized because of it. I think, again, you kind of see, you had like news stories in Ireland this year of, I can't remember which organization it was. Was it Clan Éireann,
Yeah.
Justin Barrett's group, that were essentially battered by some, and again, I'm not a fan of Clan Éireann, but they were battered by this leftist organization to essentially no reaction at all from Ireland's media or political figures, despite the fact that if it had been the other way around and you had an extreme right-wing group battering, I don't know, some group of people before profit protesters or something like that, you would have been hearing about it non-stop. So I think it's very much the case that political figures, media figures have become more savvy in their messaging because they realize that things are kind of on a knife edge, but really a lot of the underlying sentiments, a lot of the underlying developments haven't gone away. And I do think that, and I am not a fan of the fact that America exerts such a hold in so many ways on the rest of the world. But I think it remains the case that if, say, the Democrats won the midterms, and then if the Democrats did very well in the presidential elections 4 years from now, this stuff would all come back with a vengeance. I think you would see it on a scale we haven't seen to this point. So I do think it's far from having passed, it's simply gone to ground and is actually hardening as a result of what pushback there's been.
Well, I will agree with that. Definitely, at least on the American side, that the left in America will do whatever they can to ensure that Trump can never happen again, the Trump phenomenon. And they will do whatever they need to do. And in a way, a lot of people want Trump to take very decisive action. And, I understand that. You want, when you're in power, to use that power, given that you have such a massive mandate the way he does. You won the popular vote. He has the credibility to do and implement his agenda. And so you say, fair enough, that's why we elect people, is to do things that we want them to do as voters. But the problem is, if he's taking these radical actions, you are then empowering your opposition to utilize those when they get into power. And, I also think some people criticize that argument, rightly so, by saying, what are the left doing? What are the left not doing that we're afraid of? As in, they're already putting people like Trump in jail when he was running in 2024. All of the lawfare, the lawsuits. It's not like they could get any worse, but I'm not convinced of that. I think they could get a lot worse, and I think that
Well, I do think it takes your argument away from you that, say, where, for example, if a very repressive Democrat regime were to get in place and they start doing all of these extreme things, they're able to point to the things you did before and say, yeah, what's the problem? You did them as well. Whereas you do maintain something of a moral high ground if you don't play the same game. And I think the difficulty now is that a lot of people on the right don't particularly care about the moral high ground. They're like, yeah, well, you have the moral high ground, but you lose. That's true, but this is also where I would say, as a Christian, it comes in, that doesn't nullify the moral high ground. All that does is testify to the fact that suffering and defeat are a part of the human condition, and that sucks. But, regimes, nations, kingdoms rise and fall and come and go. What does endure is what you've done, and what you can your record, I suppose, ultimately. So I said this in an article that I wrote a couple of weeks ago about, and I don't want to make this conversation too America centric. We may have already done so, but about what were they calling them in America? This is very funny. The seditious six, those Democrat senators, Congress members who came out and were essentially very slyly saying to the military and intelligence community, you guys are getting unlawful orders and you really ought to serve the American people by resisting. And they've really doubled down on that. And I made the point in the article when I was writing about that it has entered a very dangerous new phase where every time the pendulum swings in either direction, any sort of cooperation with the systems in place in American life is seen as traitorous or seditious, and indeed, you would say that, well, these people calling for military members to resist the administration is the definition of sort of seditious activity, and you'd be right about that. But it very much is the case that the stakes are continuously being raised, and that dynamic in and of itself is disastrous. I mean, it all comes back to the it's not politically very helpful, but the foolproof strategy for renewal is going to be cultural renewal. I think you and I would say religious renewal, but certainly engaging in long-term cultural renewal. And I nearly feel like stoking anger and engaging, like things like Trump is doing, say, that he put underneath a bunch of the past presidential portraits in the White House, essentially these derogatory. I'm not a fan of Barack Obama. I'm not a fan of bloody Joe Biden, any of these people. But I do think putting sort of snarky messages underneath their portraits in the White House and things like that is only paving the way for more disdain for the presidential office from a future Democratic holder. But again, don't want to get too American about it. The only reason I think we dabble in it at all is because what's going on over there. I feel like the hardening of the conversation, or the sort of acceleration of the conversation over here, while yes, is driven by domestic events as well, isn't purely driven by domestic events. I mean, the Trump administration has weighed in on discussion in Ireland, and more broadly, very much so. You see this on the sort of freedom of expression and freedom of speech fronts. You see that in the Trump administration's issuance of its national security strategy, where they talk about civilizational erasure, and how I think statements like that have radicalized the wrong word, hardened the European elite against America, which naturally means it's hardened them in their sort of leftward and progressive stances. So I think it all has to be discussed together. We live in a complex world, and I do think all of these dynamics go together.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a turbulent time either way. I mean, if woke really is dying. And by the way, can I just say as well, I hate the term woke. I just find it so annoying. It doesn't describe anything. The only reason I use it is because everybody instantly knows what you mean. So from a communication perspective,
it points them in the right direction. Yeah.
Yeah, it's efficient, but I don't like it. It's a stupid term. But anyway, regardless, I'll use it for continued convenience. If woke is dying, there is going to be a significant death rattle, and you're going to see, unfortunately, probably more Charlie Kirk-like tragedies and incidents. I mean, what's next? God forbid, Matt Walsh or Michael Knowles or who knows? You know what I mean? Like, there's all these, or even like somebody on the more radical right. It's just, I think it'll get ugly before it gets better. But I would still be of the view that it is getting better, and that this is the lashing out of a late stage dying system. But obviously, it remains to be seen, and we will learn the truth in the coming year. Sorry, you were going to say?
I was just going to say, I do. For me, 2025 had the most 2020 energy to it. I don't know. And what I mean by that is that 2020, the more I think about it, the more insane a year it was. I know that's hardly a novel insight. Everyone says it all the time, between primarily the pandemic and the pandemic restrictions and the effect that had on all of us, with the infusion of the Black Lives Matter stuff into that and the way that's swept across the Western world. And I feel like a lot of that same chaotic energy is in play at the moment with the acceleration of the culture wars into militant territory, which I think this year was a bit of a watershed moment for that developing. I think also factoring into this are developments like AI, which are so obvious. This gets a little bit away from politics, but I feel like it does contribute to the feverish atmosphere, because everyone knows, apparently apart from the tech oligarchs, that this stuff is societally disastrous, and that the few good uses it has are going to be vastly outweighed by the harms that they do at the level of societal discourse and our ability to discern truth. I mean, by the end of 2025, it's become a meme at this stage. People asking, Grok, is this true? Grok, is this true? Underpost. And it's complete bot behavior. Although I know like actual people are doing that. But I feel as though it's all gotten really feverish in a way that it hasn't even since 2021. And or 2020, sorry. And that troubles me, because I feel like it's building towards something. This is all very vague and hard to substantiate, but it does feel as though it's building towards something rather than sort of breaking in the way that 2020 did. So I don't know. I don't know whether life always felt like this as an adult, and we're just feeling it particularly now because we're both parents and turning 30. I'm turning 30 next year. You're what, the year after that?
Yeah.
But it all just feels extraordinarily frenetic. The political air kind of feels like it's crackling to me these days, and I don't like that or think it's good.
Well, speaking of aging and having a kind of a midlife or quarter life crisis, I did also want to talk about a story that's of some cultural relevance and some philosophical relevance, which is Andrew Tate's loss to Chase Damore over the weekend. And I don't know how many people were following this story. It's obviously not a super important news story, and neither of us are fans of Andrew Tate by any means. I think his influence on the wider uh, male female relations is reprehensible, but uh, he is, for all his faults, a world champion kickboxer. You know, this guy is clearly a very competent athlete in his prime. He's 39 years old, and so he came back out of retirement to fight a 29-year-old influencer who is taller than him, heavier than him, and more active than him. And so he said he wanted this to kind of be his comeback fight. He said, you know, I'm supposed to lose because I'm older and I've been out of the ring so long, and so the odds are probably going to be against me, but I'm going to prove that I've still got it and that I can do it. And so he went in and he got his head kicked in, and over the course of 6 rounds, he ended up eating the canvas multiple times, and he lost by decision very comprehensively. His face was all bashed up. He had blood gushing from his eye. And I don't want to make fun of him for that at all, because a lot of people were making fun of him and saying, look at this guy. He claims he's this big alpha male and then he got battered. Literally anybody could lose a fight. And especially given all the disadvantages we just outlined, the fact that he lost is not that surprising. You could make fun of him. You could say, oh, he's delusional because he thought he was going to still win. And, you know, he clearly like bit off more than he could chew or whatever. But I think, I don't know. I think it's kind of lame that so many people, including me, are there watching this fight, judging him, given that either of the two fighters could easily kick our asses. Like I would not last one round against either of those men. Well, yeah, no, Jason would kill them both at the same time, but present company excluded. Yeah, I think it's a bit rich to be judging people for that. But I did start philosophizing in the aftermath of the fight and thinking how, you know, it says a lot about pride, humility, the reality of aging and what really matters to people, because it says what the best human effort ultimately gets you in the end, given that this guy is like a multi-millionaire former kickboxer. So in theory, on paper, he's got it all going for him. And then he steps into the ring with a younger guy, and he's not even that old. He's not even 40 yet. And because of the natural erosion of the human body that happens to everybody and that will happen to us one day if we're lucky to live that long, he just gets absolutely obliterated. And it just shows how ephemeral things like your physical prowess and your resources are. You know, the idea that I'm this tough guy, look at me, I'm this mighty man. The fact that it all amounts to naught in the end, and you just get your head kicked in by some inexperienced amateur because your body is just not what it used to be. And that you could take that as a depressing thought. You could say, oh man, that's very nihilistic. I don't think it is at all. I think it just refocuses your mind on what actually is important. You know, when you realize that stuff doesn't matter, a wise person should think, okay, well, what does matter? Because that stuff isn't going to last. Like, you could literally be built like Mr. Olympia. Inevitably, one day you're going to get to the age where you are frail, no longer have the strength to do basic things, let alone impressive things. You know, you'll be struggling to walk up the stairs, and you will be just like kind of a boring old guy who's repeating yourself and telling the same stories you've told 30 times, and your grandkids are kind of just humoring you, because that happens to everyone, you know? And so yeah, it really does make you think when you see somebody archetypal like him suffer a defeat like that. It should make you start to consider your values and what's really important to you. I don't know if you have any thoughts. I have a lot more thoughts than that, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to jump in now that we've laid out the groundwork.
That's kind of you. No, I do have some thoughts on it. I mean, I get what you mean by describing him as archetypal. I nearly think a better word, though, would be caricaturish, in the sense that the reason, I agree. I mean, no matter who it is, I don't particularly care for kicking people during low moments. if you can't say anything constructive about it, because ultimately I don't always embody it, but I do aspire to sort of, no matter who it is, you know, upbuilding them, hopefully. But I do think that the difficulty for someone like Tate, and the reason he's being slagged so roundly for the result of this fight, is that he has made his whole brand and image off of being uh unstoppable, essentially. I mean, what's he saying in his bio, or what did he used to say in his bio or pin tweet? I can't remember what it was. Someone of unmatched perspicacity. I mean, what he says is, it is ridiculous, because if you're even in slight touch with reality, you know that your performance waxes and wanes, and you're subject to the same frailties and limitations as all other people, whereas he very much projects that he isn't. And obviously we all know that. That's, why one of the reasons why he's so roundly criticized. I mean, a lot of his just, out and out immorality is the rest of it. But I think that this result was a very concrete demonstration of the fact, I think primarily a demonstration to Andrew Tate himself, that you've got a limited performance span, for want of a better way of putting it, and you've reached it in this regard anyway. And I think that, again, as you said, if you're wise, you take these warnings when you get them. He doesn't strike me as a particularly wise person, so I don't doubt he's going to, probably go to ground for a couple of days and then come back and start trash talking again in different ways. But I do think that things like this, the reason it's worth discussing as well, is because this is a lesson that I think our culture at large is very much in danger of forgetting. Because one area I think we forget our natural limitations, that I see all the time, and it's perhaps the most widespread way we forget these things, is, say, with voluntary childlessness. You see a lot of posts of people talking about how, oh, it's great not to have kids because I can get up at whatever time I want. I can spend all of my income on traveling and doing whatever I want, and I'm not sort of beholden to anyone else. And the obvious response to that is, okay, you're not beholden to anyone else right now while you're young, fit, and capable, and you have income coming in. But that's a very defined period in your life that comes to an end, as everyone who's ever aged will tell you, a lot faster than you expect. Everyone feels like they're going to be in their 20s or 30s, and which are their for their peak performance years, forever. And it's very clear, as Andrew Tate has found out, that comes to an end a lot faster than you were expecting. And this happens across the board. This is whether it's physical combat, whether it's your ability to accrue wealth, financial performance, pure intelligence as opposed to wisdom. All of these things come clattering down very quickly. I mean, we kind of were talking about it earlier, about how both of us are turning 30. Sure, I'm turning 30 next year. You're the year after that. And there are so many ways in which I'm so aware how much older I am than I was even 10 years ago. And I mean, just older in terms of my experience of the world, not even just the physical reality of the thing. It's kind of joking about how we're at my parents' house at the moment, as we always are on our trips back to Ireland, and we have the attic converted, and it's a fairly steep walk up the 3 flights of stairs, and I sometimes do bound up them, but I would be lying if I were to say that my breath isn't heavier now doing it. Now, that could obviously be remedied with exercise and things like that. Oh, I said one of my phrases there that I'm planning on cutting out as my New Year's resolution, things like that. I realized after the last episode, I just say that way too much. But anyway, we'll proceed. I realized you could remedy that with exercise, but it's also the case that as life goes on, things stack up that go against that. When you're younger, you have no encumbrances. You can exercise, you can do pretty much whatever you want. Whereas now, with kids, with work, with, you know, work, of saving, planning to buy houses, to do this, to do that, all of these other things, uh, all of your sort of performance maximizing efforts necessarily kind of take a back seat in favor of things of necessity if you're living a properly mature and responsible life. And I just think that this is one of the reasons why it's wise to live a humble and properly oriented life, because if you orient yourself properly, you can kind of meet these things as expected. Whereas if you don't, like someone like Andrew Tate, who acts as though he's the king of the world and always will be, yeah, it does come up. This does come to you like a boxing glove worn by someone who's much younger than you that you expected to be able to beat and you weren't able to. Much better to be prepared for that and end up bloodied and depressed as he apparently was at the end of that.
Yeah, I mean the thing is, if you were a humble person, then losing that fight wouldn't be embarrassing at all. Nobody would make fun of you at all for that. Like if I got beaten up, let's say I got into a fight with somebody and they beat the head off me, people will go, okay, so you beat up like a Catholic family man and a journalist, like nice one, you know, like that wouldn't be embarrassing
Well,
at all.
To be fair, a lot of people on social media, if you got beat up, would be delighted about it and making out that it was embarrassing. Well, same for me. You have a much smaller profile.
Yeah, but I don't know. I feel they just look like psychos. Whereas
Yeah, they would.
if you go around parading yourself around as the top G as he has, and then you get, it's just a different situation. And again, I'm not making fun of him. I don't want to like contribute to that because I don't think that's helpful. But yeah, I am intrigued by all of this stuff. It reminds me of the poem Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley, which is one of my favorite poems, and I'm not going to repeat the whole thing or recite it, even though I could because I'm that cultured. But there's the line, obviously the at the end of the poem where it says, "Look on my works, ye mighty in despair." This plaque, and then it finishes by saying, "Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the level sands remain," or you know what, I butchered that. I actually do know
the lone and level sands, I think it says.
The lone and level sands stretch far away, absolutely. Nothing beside remains. And obviously the point there is that you have this ancient king who's bragging about his massive monuments and cities, which are now just a pile of rubble. What's left of it is just desolate. And you know, we are dust, and we are just going to return to the dust at the end of our earthly life. And the only thing that can save you from that grim fate is eternal life, which is where your spirituality comes in, your belief in an afterlife if you have one. If you don't have a belief in an afterlife, then the dust is where you will reside.
Things are looking grim, man. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I was just going to say, I would expand, this scales up no matter who you're talking about. I often think about this in relation to, say, Elon Musk, who I think is a very funny character as well in many ways, because he's obviously, and this is the point I'm more so making, that he's a titanic figure, just objectively speaking, but then you follow him on X and it's all quite unimpressive in a lot of ways. A lot of things he says just seem very two-dimensional, and a lot of his thinking clearly isn't very joined up. But nevertheless, to stick with the sort of point that I'm trying to make, on objective metrics, he's a titanic figure in world history. I mean, there's no competition. The wealthiest man who's ever lived, one of the most influential technologically speaking who's ever lived, in terms, like, he's the CEO of multiple massive groundbreaking companies, no pun intended, given that he obviously is in charge of the Boring Company. But Tesla, SpaceX, X, I think he had a founding stake in, am I mixing him up? Did he have a founding stake in PayPal? I might be mixing
him up. Yeah. Also, those like humanoid robots.
Yeah, what are they? The Optimus
AI
robots and things. And, he obviously has very grand plans because he's Neuralink. That's another one you forget about. He's working with Neuralink to try and, I suppose, ultimately bolster people cybernetically. His stated goal is obviously to get people to Mars, so as to make consciousness multi-planetary and things like that. And, there's a lot of people who will contend with what I'm about to say, but I'll stand by it because I think the wisdom of the ages attests to it. He's going to be forgotten like everyone else. It might take longer than it'll take people to forget about you and I, Ben, but that's just the way things go. It's like, even if I'm very scared. I used to be a real, kind of funny enough, before I came back into faith, I used to be a real, you know, technological progress believer. I thought our march to Mars and onwards into the stars was, just a matter of time. I'm a lot less certain of that now, largely because the timelines they keep projecting for these things are just so unrealistic. But anyway, even if we were to get to Mars and sort of expand on beyond that, it's just the way people work that we're much more concerned with our immediate reality than we are with, legacy and history issues and things like that. And as time goes on, I mean, Ozymandias is such a great poem because, like, you are who do they believe it was? The figure he's talking about, Ramses the Second or something like this, Ramses the
Yeah.
Third, and he obviously was an absolutely titanic figure in his day. I mean, essentially godlike. No one spends any time thinking about him now, except for historians who are niche at the best of times. It's the same with the Caesars in with regards to the Roman Empire. This is obviously where, religion comes in on your side, because you would say, well, it's not that way with Christ. I mean, his name is still proclaimed in churches across the world.
This is a really important point, and if you're watching this and you're an atheist, I'd like you to just think about this, because everything I'm going to say here is inarguable fact that you don't have to have any kind of
refute us in the comments as well, just to say by all means.
Yeah. Try to argue with anything I'm about to say, because this is all. You don't need to take any kind of a leap of faith. You don't have to buy into any miracles. Just like think about what we're saying here. Alexander the Great was the king of Macedon when he was about 19 years old, Macedonia. And this place was a tiny, insignificant country. In a modern context, it might be like Lithuania or something. No offense to Lithuania, but I'm just saying it's not like a very substantial power on the world stage. And he proceeded to, as a young man in his early 20s, defeat basically the entire world, all of Greece, all of Egypt, Persia, which was a massive superpower at the time. This would be like if some 19-year-old kid became the prime minister of Lithuania, and then he went on to beat Russia, all of Europe, America, etc. Like this is the level of unbelievable genius you're talking about. Unfathomable competence. And he was believed in his own time to be a god. He claimed to be a god king, and people worshipped him as a god king for several centuries afterwards.
Understandably so as well.
Yeah, he's doing godlike stuff. This guy is clearly anointed by Olympus, so obviously we're going to worship him. How many people today worship Alexander the Great? Nobody, despite all of those unbelievable things he did, which we know as a matter of historical record. And yet Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, let's call him, who was just some insignificant carpenter who got executed by the state, is worshipped by and revered by billions of people 2,000 years later. Like, if you include Muslims who consider him at the very least a prophet who's worthy of respect, and then you have Christians who obviously think he's God and pray to him, you're talking about a significant chunk of the world's population who revere this guy, who didn't conquer anything. He didn't take up a sword and, colonize these people or subjugate anybody or force them to bow down to him. He was just a guy who went around the desert talking to people, got executed at a young age, and we're still talking about him right now to this day. And he's, people are, their lives are changed by his teachings. I think that's something that people should really reflect on. If you kind of just write Jesus off as some kind of like, oh yeah, he's just some fairy tale from history. Like, really think about the implications of that.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, just on that point, I know we kind of went on a bit of a tangent, but on that point, I mean, there's a number, and no serious historian, questions whether Jesus existed. What serious contention is over is whether he was who he, said he was. And it's just extraordinarily interesting because, again, it is insight into how the world actually works, which is that it's very surprising and indeed humbling that there is no person who has proclaimed themselves as great, we say, other than him, who is still, although he obviously proclaimed himself as great by making himself very small, but there's no person who sort of proclaimed themselves as great, say like Alexander the Great or the Caesars. Do you stick with those examples? Who are, beyond sort of just interests today. I mean, you get kind of LARPers who, in their niche historical or political views will still pay tribute to these, but it's just that they're niche and it's of absolutely no broader consequence. And I think that there are lessons in these things for people who are going to tune into them. But the human temptation is always, I do think Andrew Tate is deplorable, but I can acknowledge that I think he embodies the sort of human temptation more generally to big yourself up and to make more of yourself than there actually is. And he's obviously just been made to look particularly ridiculous because of that course of conduct. And yeah, as I say, I don't expect his conduct to change. I think he'll probably lay low for a couple of days and then come back with his usual regime of posting. But I think that if you were wise, this is one cultural thing you could tune into and actually draw some pretty decent life lessons out of.
Yeah, I don't want to flog a dead horse and keep going on and on about it, but off camera, I started to talk about this interview I had seen with the MMA fighter Kamaru Usman, who was talking to Joe Rogan a while back, and he was saying how he actually prefers it when he beats a guy over the course of a full 5-round fight rather than some kind of spectacular one-punch knockout in the first round, because he says that when you knock a guy out really quickly, he will start to cope and say, oh, it was a fluke. He got lucky. It wasn't that he's better than me. He just happened to be having a good night. Or
if I can interject, I would just say I had a much lower stakes version of this happen to me over the weekend. I never do Wordle, but whenever my parents do it devotedly, and so I was like, okay, I'll have a go at Wordle. And my family all got it, and I'm like really competitive. And for those who don't know, it was Friday or Saturday. The word was myrrh, so obviously biblical word. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but anyway, my family had all done it ahead of me, and I was doing it last, and they got it. I think my parents got it in 4 or something like that. And I was like, okay, I have to get it better than that. But I'll easily spend like hours trying to think about it, even if I'm not staring at my phone for all of that time. And in the meantime, we started a game of Scrabble, and I was doing really badly. And me being a classic sore loser, I was like, oh, I can't concentrate because I'm still thinking about this Wordle word, and I can't get any other letters off my head. Bloody Y and H, which were the only two letters that I had. And so anyway, I ended up losing Scrabble, and I ended up because I was like, oh, I haven't split my attention between these things. So I just put in 5 random words and lost Wordle. And then I ended up coming last in Scrabble anyway. And I was just such a sore loser about it for the rest of the evening. But it's just the human temptation, man, to excuse yourself. It's something
yeah,
else.
exactly. Yeah. That's, and I think like everybody kind of relates to that. You can kind of imagine what he means when he says that, like, when you comprehensively get your ass kicked over the course of 25 minutes as opposed to 1 minute, you go, oh yeah, no, this guy's just better than me. Like, there's no way I can beat him. And it's much more like demoralizing for the person. And
Yeah.
as you was saying this, I had an epiphany about the part of the book of Exodus where it keeps saying that Pharaoh, his instinct was to let the Israelites go, but then his heart was hardened. And he decided, no, actually, at the last minute, he changed his mind and he kept going. And then all the plagues are happening one after the other. And at a first glance reading of that, you kind of go, isn't that really unjust and unfair? If his instinct was to do the right thing, why does God seem to be allowing him to continue making the wrong decision and then suffering negative consequences for that? And I wondered, is there an element of, if let's say Pharaoh had caved after the first plague and he went, okay, I'll let them go. On some level, he would no doubt think, as all humans do, you know what, that plague wasn't that bad. And actually, I shouldn't have given in at all. You know what I mean? Like, the lesson hasn't really been learned. He's caving in the immediate current moment because he wants the pain to stop, but it hasn't really seeped into his subconscious in the way it needs to for him to get it through his head that you need to cop on, basically. And so I wonder, does God, even if you feel like, okay, I've learned my lesson, stop whatever harm is coming to me in my life, and then he keeps kicking your ass for like another 3 years, and you're kind of like, what? Why are you letting this happen to me? You know what I mean? I've learned the lesson. It's like, no, you haven't really learned your lesson.
Yeah.
Like, there's still it needs. Because I don't know if people are familiar with there's a certain personality type of individual that you run into sometimes who's very conflict averse, and you'll confront them about something, and you'll say, here, listen, I don't want you leaving your clothes here. And they kind of go, okay. And they sort of cut you off almost because they don't want to have the conversation. They want to just eject themselves from the situation. And sometimes it's necessary to sit them down and be like, no, we're having a conversation about this. Like, I don't care that you're tapping out. I need to give out to you because you're clearly not understanding me, sort of thing. That there's a bit of that going on, and I think you learn that quickly as a parent as well. So this has gone very, very, very far away from the Andrew Tate conversation, but these are all the
lessons you can draw from the Andrew Tate and Chase Damore fight. We didn't even we weren't even planning on discussing it, but it was a week for kind of trashy fights. You had Logan Paul and Anthony Joshua as well, and that similarly went you would expect. Jake Paul, yeah, my bad. Jake Paul and Anthony Joshua. It goes to show how much I pay attention to these things. But what I did see, I didn't watch the fight, obviously, was that Jake Paul got his jaw broken or something by Anthony Joshua. And again, it's kind of like, I don't know whether he expected that to happen. A lot of the time he engages in fights, everyone is obviously suspecting that they're kind of rigged and they're supposed to be for his own promotion. But I can't imagine he planned to come away with a broken jaw.
No, yeah. I mean, towards the end, he was taunting the guy, sticking his tongue out, after it was clear that he was losing. And so people were speculating that he realized he was going to lose. I think he probably knew that going into it, to be honest. But he realized he was going to lose. So he thought, I need a cool photograph of me sticking my tongue out as he's coming at me. But because I'm going out, like I'm going to be knocked on the canvas any second now. So I need to just get this iconic picture in that I can then frame and show my kids or something, Which, fair enough, I understand that.
It is the case. I mean, Jake Paul, obviously, to be fair to him, does more training than me. He'd probably be able to beat me up as well. But nevertheless, everyone knew he's completely outmatched, and something like this was like a cartoonish matchup. And when you're so outmatched facing someone like, say, Anthony Joshua, you may as well be standing there facing a tsunami or something like that. Like, there's nothing you can do about it,
No.
But anyway, yeah, a lot of trashy fights to draw biblical lessons from this weekend.
Yeah, I think that this is probably going to irritate a lot of people who are like, I came here for Irish politics news. What the hell is this? But that's the Christmas episode for you.
Andrew Tate in the Book of Exodus.
That's a great episode title.
Yeah, but the last one, if we are doing a Christmas episode, will make a lot more sense because we're drawing something out from the vaults of. So before we launched the podcast, we did a couple of practice episodes that we never put out. And one of the topics we did in that we're actually drawing out because, well, first of all, it wasn't very good back when we were doing the practice episodes. But it's also the case that at least my views have changed on this since we did the practice episode. And so it'll make for a much better disagreement now, in my opinion. We wanted to discuss, how was it we framed it in that episode? I can't even remember. We wanted to discuss
like the ethics.
Yeah. Oh, that was it. Yeah, the ethics of Santa Claus and raising your child believing that Santa exists and that he brings presents to them. I'll just provide some context. I think, yeah, certainly because this was like the first practice episode we did. It was a really poor discussion, but I think we also kind of just ended up agreeing a lot on these things. But we've since diverged a lot more over the course of the past year. You might wonder what the hell happened in 2025 that you changed your view on this. The answer would be that my wife and I spoke more about it. But how about you lay out your position first, Ben, and how little Ben Jr. is going to be experiencing Christmas?
Yeah, so I was raised learning about Santa Claus as a little child, and it was something that brought me a lot of joy. And I quite enjoyed the whole ritual of having a fat man come down the chimney and eat biscuits and leave presents. And like I fully bought into it as a kid completely, and it was something I was
To
extremely
the
like.
point that you still force a fat man to climb down your chimney to this day, even though you don't believe
Yeah,
in Santa.
absolutely. It's getting harder and harder to find guys who can fit. But absolutely. No, but yeah, it's something that I got a lot of happiness out of when I was younger. But I'm wondering, I started to wonder about the ethics of lying to your child. And by the way, I also want to be clear that I'm not judging anybody who chooses to continue to do this. Like my parents did it, and I think my parents obviously were very good parents who I love. So I'm not saying that it's some kind of awful, reprehensible thing to do this, but we all know that sometimes when children learn that Santa Claus isn't real, that's like a very upsetting experience for them. And like generally you get over it. You know what I mean? Like you say, okay, well that's a bit sad that this thing that I got a lot of enjoyment out of isn't actually real and is all made up. But oh well, and then you move on with your life. But I started wondering about whether it increases the odds of a lack of religiosity in the sense that Santa almost has a kind of a quasi godlike role to play in children's lives. He sees you when you're sleeping, he knows when you're awake. He rewards you if you're good, he punishes you if you're bad with coal and so on. There's a kind of he's almost like a stand-in minor deity so far as children are concerned. And so if your parents who you trust with all your heart tell you this thing is real, and you're like, okay, I mean, it must be real because mom and dad says it's true. And then in the end, they say, actually, it was all an elaborate conspiracy where we were tricking you. Like I remember, like Santa Claus would eat the cookies and the reindeer would eat the
Carrot.
carrot. And I would come out and there'd be bites taken out of it and there'd be crumbs. So, like, elaborate evidence that this actually happened. And then when you find out that it was all just contrived fiction, I wonder on a subconscious level, does it make kids say, actually, you know what? The God must be fake too. Because, they're telling me there's this guy, there's this spiritual force out there that loves me. And if I should pray to it, all these good things will happen and blah, blah, blah. But this must just be another one of those scams because I can't see it. Like, I feel like there's got to be a penalty for doing that when it comes to your children's trust in the supernatural more broadly. And as a religious person, I don't want to risk that. So I'm thinking the compromise I'm going to do. My son, he's only 2, so he's not really at an age where this matters yet. He doesn't really fully understand these things anyway. But my wife and I were kind of coming around to the view that we're going to tell him that Saint Nicholas is real, because as a Catholic, that's a perfectly reasonable belief to have. And that if you pray for his intercession, he will help to inspire mommy and daddy to get better presents for you, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And all of
yeah.
that is totally Orthodox Catholic belief. He could believe that when he's 90 years old, and that wouldn't be problematic or, in contradiction of, what he's permitted to believe. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult one, and I don't judge anybody who makes a different decision. It's just something that I've been thinking about lately, that I think is easy to just thoughtlessly go along with it because it's the done thing without
Yeah, yeah.
considering, So I don't know. I'd like to hear your perspective on it, though.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I fully get, I share your concerns as to the effect of this thing. And yeah, a lot of people would be easy to say, oh, what a pair of losers, way over analyzing this. But I would say a lot of the way we got into the moral mess we're in as a culture is the fact that people just don't think about things. Everyone does just go along with things and they don't think about why we do this or why we don't do that. So they just go along with what everyone else is doing. And so therefore you have to end up looking a bit like an idiot and wondering about, the ethics of telling your kid about Santa and things like that. I said it again. But anyway, I think the reason both of us share this concern is because neither you nor I were particularly devoutly Catholic when we were, Santa believing kids. And therefore, we don't know what sort of effect finding out, say, that Santa isn't real would have on your faith in God if you had that as a child. And I initially was a lot more cautious, say, as you were. And I'm open to being convinced of this, but where I come down at the moment is ultimately that finding out that Santa wasn't real wasn't an existential blow to me as a child. I actually felt like I was being let in on something that it nearly felt like a sort of maturing rite of passage, I suppose I would put it that way, in the sense that I still remember to this day, I think it was 10 or something, I can't remember, something like that, when I was told, say, that Santa wasn't real, and I sort of fully believed it up to that point. Again, yeah, a lot of the irrefutable evidence I'd have presented would have been the fact that, yeah, the milk is someone drinks the milk, someone takes bites out of the cookies, someone eats the carrot. And nevertheless, when I was told that, my parents did it, and I have a younger brother, and they didn't tell him, I sort of felt as though I was being adopted by adulthood in a sense, and I was obviously responsible for keeping it secret from my brother as well. And so that certainly wasn't, a blow to my trust in my parents with regards to anything else. I really just because my parents kind of explained that it's, this is just this is what you do, this is what everyone does. I fully bought that, and it's funny because this debate was ignited on X, funny enough, amongst Christians a couple of weeks ago, and there were as many approaches to sort of Santa and Santa experience and the Santa myth as there were people, even amongst people who were like fully orthodox and all submit to the same creed. There was complete difference of opinion as to how to approach this, which made me a lot more relaxed about it. I think because clearly, I think a lot of these people's kids are going to be okay in terms of formation. But where I've kind of come down on it now after chatting about it with my wife is that, yeah, I think Santa's fine so long as it's subjugated in importance to what Christmas is actually about. I think that's the primary danger. People start thinking, telling their kids or allowing their kids to believe that Santa is the be all and end all of Christmas. And that, yeah, he's the one you have to worry about knowing if you've been bad or good rather than God. I have no issue. We also have the added difficulty of the fact that we're a Polish-Irish couple and they do things slightly differently between those two countries. Like, obviously, our audience know how we do in Ireland, how most of us do in Ireland, not Ben, obviously. Um, and in Poland, they get the presents on Christmas Eve, and they're brought by obviously Santa is Saint Nicholas, although that's kind of an element that's been lost in a lot of households. But Saint Nicholas is Święty Mikołaj, so Saint Mikołaj, which is Saint Nicholas. He brings the presents on Christmas Eve, and the way it's often done is not that they just kind of appear. It's more so that someone in the house dresses up as Santa and comes in and gives the presents to the kids, and then, I don't know, leaves out the back door or something like that. And then all of a sudden, dad appears again somewhere else in the house, and they don't put two and two together. So we're trying to figure out
You see Santa runs out the back garden. He hops the fence, but he gets caught on like some barbed wire or like, and he's like cursing and everything. And then
yeah.
dad comes back in, torn to shreds, like covered in blood. And yeah, well, yeah,
Yeah, it's going to be something like that. But I think never the common thread there is that Santa brings the gifts. You can figure out the nuances of what time he does it at and what you call him and things like that. Bloody hell, I'm out of control with this. But anyway, I think that we're at a place now where we don't have an issue with that so long as you do kind of see it. The reason, say, Santa's bringing the gifts is because we're all celebrating Jesus's birthday, and that's what it's about. It's very much in the mold of the wise men bringing the gifts when Jesus was born, and that's why everyone's celebrating, and Santa's sort of the method by which we celebrate. You could get into really metaphysical territory here and say Santa actually does exist because, we're all talking about something. It's just a very different mode of existence to the materialist, physical mode of being is the only way something can exist. But I think that's kind of where we've come down on it, which is what we are going to do. We're just going to absolutely make sure that it's subjugated in importance to what Christmas is actually about, which is obviously the birth of Christ. And I do also think that it's not going to present a threat to their belief in God because God is so much broader a reality. Say Santa is relegated to Christmas and serves a very specific function of explaining why there are gifts under the tree at a certain time. Whereas there's no one, as both you and I know, there's no one knockdown thing to the concept of God, provided you convey a proper understanding of God. God is responsible for the existence of the world. He's responsible for meaning. He's responsible for quite literally everything primarily. And there's no one thing that can happen, say, that to my mind can nullify that in the same way that, say, Santa can be nullified by your parents saying, you know, yeah, Santa doesn't exist. I feel like even if you form your kid properly over the years and you say, okay, even if you're to turn to them and say God doesn't exist, I would hope that they'll be able to say, well, I don't know, a lot of the things you told us make pretty good sense, and I think you might be wrong about that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I don't know. It's like clearly there are millions and millions of religious people who grow up with Santa Claus, find out he's not real, and then keep being religious. So maybe I'm just stupid. Like maybe there's research on this that actually I'd love to see a study as to what the evidence says, because intuitively it seems to me like it should do some kind of harm, but maybe I'm just totally wrong about that. So we'll see. Be sure to leave a comment and let us know what you think.
We'll be sure to check back in 20 years' time, see how our kids have adjusted.
Yeah, my son is the Pope, and your son is the lead singer of a satanic metal band or something.
He's the Antifa chapter leader outside the Vatican.
Yeah, that's what the Santa fraud does. This is those like before and after pictures of like somebody who's been doing drugs for a decade or whatever.
But who knows? Maybe we'll do this again a year from now. My thoughts might have changed on it again. I'm very open to being persuaded by different arguments, but where I stand at the moment is it's actually of less consequence than people think, provided you're just fairly reasonable as an adult yourself.
Because the amount of songs, Christmas songs, that are just like, as a religious person, I obviously want Christmas songs to be religiously themed and to be about the incarnation and all of that. But even if I wasn't religious, they're just kind of hollow and stupid, like Let It Snow. Okay, like what are we saying? That it snows a lot during winter? I kind of knew that. Or just so many of them. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I know that's kind of a children's one, so you don't want to be a Grinch and just attack childhood joy. But
it is true. Once the religious meaning of it's gone, it hollows out. It's like all of these other elements are nice, but you don't want to live for nice. You want to live for meaning and purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, no, anyway, there's no way to talk about this without sounding like you're attacking people's cherished family traditions. So I'll probably stop digging my hole and allow people to rage at me in the comments. So with that said, thank you all so much for a year of watching this podcast. Thank you everybody for your comments and for your contributions on each of the episodes, and for at least not making fun of my appearance. I didn't get many compliments, but nobody said I was ugly, so I'll take that. And, we look forward to seeing you all again in the new year. We'll be back in January for another episode of the Long Game Podcast.
God bless.